This is the very first public live information session for Ukraine, and we were asked to introduce LIFE to you and give you an overview of calls that are currently opened, so that you can already this year apply for a funding for your project idea. However, for us, it is also an opportunity to get to know your needs. So do not hesitate to ask us questions or make comments. You can ask any questions that come to your mind about LIFE program. And how can you ask questions? Simply by writing them in the chat box on the right. Before we begin, a quick look on the agenda. I just realized my slides are not changing right. So a quick look on the agenda before we begin. We will start with introductions from the representative of CINEA. And after this, we will have a short overview of the open calls and where to find them. And how to navigate a very complex landscape of currently open calls. And after this, we have divided the program into 4 parts, and we will look. We will give a closer look to 4 sub-programs of the LIFE program. We will start with Life, Nature and Biodiversity. We will follow with Life, Circular Economy and Quality of Life, which is this part of the LIFE program that covers all the other environmental policies except for nature and biodiversity. We will then, around 11:30, take a half-an-hour break. And after the break, we will continue with 2 other LIFE sub-programs, LIFE Climate Action and LIFE Clean Energy Transition. If there is a bit of time after each presentation to ask questions, we will answer them. However, if there are a lot of questions or questions are not related to the presentations, we will reconvene after the lunch break and have an additional Q&A session. All right, I believe we are ready to begin. And I'm very pleased to announce that the Director of the European Climate Infrastructure and Environment Executive Agency is able to join us today to welcome you in this special day for the LIFE program. Mr. Dirk Beckers, thank you for being here today. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Maya, and thank you. And I would say good morning to all of you. And it's really a pleasure indeed that I can join this for this, I think, important event for all of you, but for us as well. And it's I really would like to warmly welcome all of you to this live info session. And I'm in particular pleased when I was informed that there's so much interest for it. So very good. As you might know, CINEA is one of the 6 executive agencies that have been established by the European Commission to manage programs on its behalf. And of course, as you see from the session today, we are responsible for LIFE, but apart from that, we're managing as well quite some other programs like the transport and energy parts of the Connecting Europe Facility program. We are in charge of the renewable energy financing mechanism. We are parts of the Horizon Europe, and in particular the climate, energy and mobility parts of it are in charge. We are in charge of them. We are as well managing the Innovation Fund, the European Maritime Fisheries and Aquacultural Fund, and then the Just Transition Mechanism. So all of this, as you can see, are programs that are managing or that are important for the Green Deal objectives, and so we are having an important part of that. But of course, for today, we're extremely happy that Ukraine is joining the LIFE program, and I would sincerely hope that working with us will help you in this, without any doubt, difficult times for you and for Ukraine as such. And of course, you can count on CINEA to do our very best to help you with this program. So I just wanted to be a very short introduction, but I will follow the rest as well, because I'm really pleased to see your interest, and I would like to see as well your questions and how things are going. But now I would like to pass the floor to Angelo Celci, who is in the agency, the head of the Natural Resources, Climate, Sustainable Blue Economy and Clean Energy Department, which amongst others is in charge of the LIFE program, and that's of course of main importance for you. So let me wish you at the end a very interesting and I hope in particular, like Maya said as well, active session. So please don't hesitate to come up with your questions to my colleagues. and all the best for this session. And I would like to pass the floor now to Angelo. Angelo, up to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Dirk. So for the participants, we have very long names, both the agency and the department, but don't get scared of it. We like to have long names, and you call us Cinea and you call us Life, and we perfectly understand what we're talking about. The first thing I want to add to what Dirk just said, apart from obviously my personal welcoming to everyone on board, is the fact that Ukraine is by far not new to LIFE. We have had projects with Ukrainian partners or with actions in Ukraine, and we have currently projects open that are running with actions and partners in Ukraine. This is thanks to the inner flexibility of the LIFE program and also of the interest of working in a transboundary fashion across borders, especially for nature conservation, but not only. So you should not start from the idea that this is a completely new area. It's something where you have already some experience. The other thing I would like to underline is that we are now in the call. The call is open until the 4th of October. So already in normal situation, if you want, the task of putting together a good project proposal associated obviously to a good idea is challenging with the time that we have in front of us, which is just a few months. Clearly, the situation in Ukraine makes it even more complex and more difficult, because on the one side, we have to understand altogether what are the needs. And then once we have established indeed the needs, we have also to understand the practicalities connected to them. So the feasibility of certain project ideas, especially because LIFE projects take, for example, the field of nature conservation. They are frequently site-related activities, so the work on the ground. And clearly, in a situation like the one you are experiencing in Ukraine, I must admit my personal ignorance on the exact situation, but I guess we have to evaluate the feasibility on the ground. There are places probably where work on the ground cannot be done. In other places, instead, exactly the opposite. So we really need this kind of ancillary information and put them together with you, and possibly almost proposal by proposal to sit down with you and the Ukrainian authorities to make sure that we understand the context in which the project will operate. So it's we will have to use the full extent of flexibility that we are allowed by our legal instruments because of the very particular situation we are all living in. And on this side, I think my colleagues are fully committed in order to make sure that this will happen. And this very event is a testimony, a witness, an example of what I just said. So don't hesitate to voice your needs, concerns, and wishes. And we will try to make sure that we sort of create an environment and facilitate the development of those concepts in a way that they do stand a chance when we come to the end of the process. On the other side, if by any chance you have any doubt about the feasibility, or you are still in the very first development stages of your concept, probably the best advice I can already give you now is to consider this for the next round, which does not stop you obviously from discussing with us the concept itself. So I think this is just, I guess, more common sense than really anything else. And I wanted to put it on the table because it's important for everyone to understand indeed that we are in a framework where we have to act within a legal established framework. The bidding system is it's mostly a competitive bidding system. So we have to obviously evaluate and then compare with the other proposals and so on. So I don't want you to rush into something that could create more frustration then results. We want to make sure that indeed any good concept today becomes a project, so it's finally eventually financed, and that any good idea that is promising and needs a bit more development indeed is taken care of in the appropriate time and fashion, so that we all get to the final result, which is action on the ground that will bring back some normality to a situation that we would like pretty soon to change. Thanks, Maya, back to you.
Thank you, Angelo. All right, indeed, it's relatively late to start preparing proposals, but it's not an impossible task. So we would like to be able to share with you any information that will allow you to jump on this moving train and be better understand how to navigate this complex universe of live calls. And therefore, we will start with this first very short overview of how to understand currently open calls and how to choose the one that is the most interesting for you, taking into account your project idea. As I meant, sorry, I didn't press share the button. Right. So life may appear as a complex instrument. And when you have a first look at our website or the list of open calls, it can be a bit intimidating. So we will first start with this basic explanations, how to navigate through this complex universe and how to understand which call is perhaps most suitable for you. So I'm sure that many of you already know that LIFE is the EU financing instrument for environment and climate action. It's been around for 30 years, and for all those years, its main objectives have not really changed much. It's designed to help hold and reverse the loss of biodiversity and protect nature, support implementation, development, update of EU environmental and climate policies, and to help to contribute to the shift to a circular, energy efficient, renewable energy based and climate resilient economy. How is this all done? Well, primarily through projects, so action grants that are accessible pretty much to everybody. So the NGOs, public authorities, small, medium enterprises, big industry, etc. So if you consider applying for LIFE, the very first thing you need to consider is in which out of the 4 sub-programs my project fits best. And you have a choice between the 4 sub-programs that support 4 specific policy areas: nature and biodiversity, circular economy and quality of life, which, as I mentioned in the beginning, covers all the environmental policies except for nature and biodiversity, climate change mitigation and adaptation, and clean energy transition. Once you know, our subsequent presentations are divided per each subprogram, so you will hear more about each of them, and both from me and from my colleagues in a minute. So we will explore a bit more specificities of each of these subprograms. And so that, let's say, will be the first decision to make. But once you know which subprogram is most suitable for you, you need to also choose the type of project. And this is the choice you are actually facing. It may seem overwhelming, but trust me, it is really not. In practice, most of you will be choosing between standard action projects, integrated projects, possibly technical assistance projects, or other actions. Other types of projects or forms of funding that you see on the screen are very specialized or have a very narrow focus or specific target audience. So they typically are not of interest to most of applicants. So how do you choose the right type of the projects among those that I have highlighted for you? Let's start with standard action projects. Standard action projects, or as we call them, SAPs, are the most flexible, universal type of project available in life. They are ready for everybody: NGOs, small and medium enterprises, public authorities, industry, associations, etc. There is no minimum or maximum project budget. You are free to implement this kind of project alone or with other partners. You can have just actions in Ukraine, or you can have a transboundary project forming partnership with entities from other countries. They can be neighboring countries, but they can be also the countries from across the EU, depending on your project objectives. You decide on the duration of the project, but please note that it should not be more than 10 years. And as you will see in the subsequent presentations on specific sub-programs, the priorities are very broad, and they cover a range of policies from nature and biodiversity through water, soil, waste, circular economy, air quality, climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, etc. So whatever your project idea is, it's very likely that it will, in one way or another, correspond to the policies that are covered by standard action projects. As you can see, on the screen the definition of standard action projects. So you see that they actually have two angles. They develop, demonstrate, and promote innovative techniques, methods, and approaches on one hand, and of course contribute to knowledge base. But they also they can be also applying best practices, typically for nature and biodiversity, but sometimes also for other policy areas. They also support the development, implementation, monitoring, and enforcement of the relevant union legislation and policy, including by improving governance at all levels. They also contribute to capacity building, and a very important feature is also involvement of civil society and stakeholders. Because life budget is relatively small overall, an important feature of standard action project is what we also call the catalyzing the solutions that have been developed or proved successful for the projects. So in other words, spreading the successful solutions beyond the project so that others can also benefit from them. The co-financing rate is at 60%. Sometimes in exceptional cases, we can go up to 75% only for nature and biodiversity. But that means that the missing 40% has to be covered by your own contribution or by co-financing. So that's standard action projects, and I strongly recommend having a closer look because it's most likely going to suit the needs of many of you. Now, integrated projects, which we divide into two categories, SIPs and SNAPs. I will explain the difference in a minute. Unlike SAPs, so the ones we have just seen, these projects are not for everybody. These are the projects specifically designed for public authorities responsible for the implementation of plans and strategies required by EU legislation. All those strategies are listed on my slide. So, for example, for circular economy, we have national or regional circular economy action plans, strategies, or roadmaps. And for climate, national energy efficiency action plans. My colleagues will be also touching upon those, so I will not present you the full list right now. But I mean, you get an idea of what kind of plans and strategies we are talking about. And important thing to know about SIPs is that these are the projects that are implemented at large territorial scale, and typically they cover either entire country or at least a region. So very ambitious in terms of territorial scope. Another important thing to know about this project is that they require mobilization of all the stakeholders who are the key for the implementation of given plan. And they need to contain a mechanism to mobilize and coordinate additional activities and resources needed to implement that plan. Why? Because implementation of any of the plan listed on my slide is very expensive, and live grant of typically 10 to 12 million euros can be used to help bridge some gaps and remove obstacles for the implementation of the plan. But the actual implementation has to be financed by additional EU, national or private resources, because it's simply a big financial task. The co-financing rate is 60%. So again, the beneficiaries or the co-financers need to contribute missing 40%. So that's one type of integrated project. And another type of integrated projects are strategic nature projects. They are very similar to the ones I have just described. So the only major difference is that they are designed specifically for the nature sub-program, and they are designed to implement again at the large territorial scale with the mobilization of additional financial resources and all the concerned stakeholders, the prioritized action frameworks that are required by the Habitats Directive, or alternatively, other plans or strategies that are adopted at international, national, regional, or multi-regional level for nature and biodiversity. Otherwise, they have the same features as integrated projects designed for the two other policy areas, so environment and climate action. So we call them collectively integrated projects, and if you hear SIP or SNAP acronym, we like acronyms. That means we are referring to an integrated project. So typically they have a duration of 14 years. And that's a maximum duration. Of course, they can be completed earlier. And one general remark about SIPs and SNAPs is that not only the projects themselves are very complex and difficult to implement, but also the preparation of the project applications is very demanding. Therefore, if you are a public authority interested in preparation of SIP or SNAP, you can get additional support from us. Firstly, we run a special, let's say, IP, so SIP and SNAP help desk. And we would recommend that if you're interested in this kind of project, you get in touch with us. You can see the email on the screen. So we can discuss in detail your integrated project idea. And then we will be able to advise you if you can submit concept note, if your idea fits in the concept of a SIP or SNAP, or if perhaps you should consider applying for technical assistance first. And this is a kind of small grant for relevant authorities that can be used to write a SIP or SNAP application. And maximum contribution to this small technical assistance grant is 70,000 euros with co-financing rate also at 60%. So please note that the help desk is only available for SIPs and SNAPs applicants, not for SAPs, so not for those general universal projects. Unfortunately, we are unable to run similar services for other types of projects to ensure transparency and the fairness of treatment. So we have seen already 3 types of projects: standard action projects, very universal; integrated projects to help authorities implement specific plans and strategies, possibly with the early support of technical assistance; And now we are going to move to the last type of project that might be of interest to you, and these are other action grants. So if you open Life Multi-Annual Work Program, you will see that there are many types of other action grants. However, the one that you may want to have a closer look at are coordination and support actions, so CSAs. And this is a standard type of grant for the Clean Energy Transition subprogram. And my colleague will be talking about this program in more detail after the break. But you can see that the conditions for this kind of projects are slightly different. The co-financing rate is of 95% maximum. And they focus on breaking market barriers to the clean energy transition through capacity building, dissemination of information and knowledge, also awareness raising. These are very specific projects. I mean, they are policy-driven calls that offer funding on the basis of prescriptive call topics. So the focus is a bit more narrow than in case of SAPs, very specific. And there is a predefined set of call topics per year. They typically require engagement of multiple stakeholder and transnational consortium, minimum 3 partners from 3 different eligible countries for most of the funding topics. And they have the results that tend to be EU widely validated and fit into EU policy making. So there is also a specific email address if you are interested in this particular type of projects that you can ask questions, and you can see it on my screen. All right. So now you know we have 4 sub-programs: nature, circular economy, climate action, and clean energy transition. And you know that there are 4 types of projects that you can use. And the good news is, as Angelo mentioned in the beginning, that several of the live calls for all those projects and sub-programs are currently open. And now you can see the overview of those calls. And I realize, again, so this is basically what is currently available. So applications to all those calls need to be submitted through one place. It's the EU Funding and Tenders portal. You can find it under this address. And I realize this may seem a bit complex, and it may look it is really just the tip of an iceberg, and you might still wonder where to begin. The good place to begin is obviously this meeting, and we will now dive into more information about the open calls and give you some examples of projects so you can better understand what kind of projects we are supporting. However, we will not be able to cover everything today, obviously. And so after this meeting, my suggestion is actually to dive into wealth of the resources that are available already online to get to know LIFE program better, and also to better understand requirements of each call. A good place to start is obviously LIFE website on CINEA. We have also a very useful document there which is called Live Q&A, Live Frequently Asked Questions, which explains a lot of aspects linked to the evaluation criteria, but also a number of financial issues. We have recordings from EU-wide info days that took place in May, just after the call was open. We have also a network of live contact points. So if you are considering forming a partnership with an organization from another EU member state, it is definitely a good idea to ask them for the support, because they understand and master live rules very well. And we have a very nice live project database. where you can have additional let's say inspiration for what has been supported by EULife in the past. And if you have questions, you can of course write us an email if still something is unclear. And I know for clean energy transition, my colleague will also be sharing additional, let's say, you have seen the additional address where you can ask the question, but yeah, if you write to this one, we will definitely forward the email to the right mailbox so you can get an answer. Okay, so this was the, let's say, the introduction to the existing live calls. Now we will move, because we are running a bit behind the time, we will move to the first sub-program, which is Life, Nature, and Biodiversity. What is the main purpose of the focus of this sub-program? Well, the main focus is saving endangered EU habitats and species, so the ones that are listed in EU Habitats Directive and Birds Directive. Expanding the Natura 2000 network and improving its management. Boosting awareness of EU nature legislation, improving knowledge of nature's value to the economy, society, and our well-being, removing invasive alien species, reaching out to stakeholders important for the nature conservation, and much, much more. So in terms of available funding opportunities to achieve all those policy objectives, as I mentioned, you have a choice between two types of projects, standard action projects or SNAPs. As I mentioned in the beginning, most likely most of you will find SNAPs most suitable to your needs if you want to implement projects that focus on nature conservation. In the currently open call, we have two priorities. One, a very broad one, it's called SAP Nature and Biodiversity, which is focusing on smart outcome-based implementation of EU nature legislation or targets of the EU biodiversity for 2030. The funding rate is between 60 to 75%. 75% is reserved for projects that focus on the priorities that are specified in the call. We have a quite substantial budget for this call. However, the level of ambition and competition between the applicants is going very high. So in reality, with this budget, we don't always have a chance to support all the great applications that we receive. So it's quite competitive, but it's a very universal topic which covers almost all the aspects of EU nature and biodiversity policy. We have also a smaller topic, very specific, that focuses on EU nature and biodiversity legislation-related compliance, assurance, public participation, and access to justice. And as you can see, it's a very small call. The topic budget is 3 million euros. So in reality, we expect to be able to support only 1 or 2 projects this year. And they are very specific. And I'll give you an example in a minute so you can understand the difference between the two topics. So let's start with nature and biodiversity. This is the call that is currently open, the most universal call under nature sub-program. When you open the call document, you will see that the call is the priorities in a nutshell, because they are, again, very, very broad. They are divided into 2 intervention areas, space for nature and safeguarding our species. And how do we prioritize the project applications that we receive? Well, one of the priorities is based on the EU Habitats Directive. So habitats or species in unfavorable and declining conservation status, so U1 minus, but in particular in favorable, bad, and declining conservation status, U2 minus, have a priority. Also, the priority is attributed to the projects that target bird species and habitats not covered by EU nature legislation, but so species or habitats in higher extinction risk categories, so endangered or worse, in EU red lists or European global IUCN red lists for overseas countries and territories. So as you can see, one of the main driver is the conservation status. The worse, the higher the priority. However, that's not all, because the nature policy is of course very well developed and rather complex. So we also apply further prioritization of the proposals based on the further policy priorities. So of course, Birds and Habitats Directive. So projects that target Birds and Habitats Directive have a priority, followed by, it's equal actually, sorry, not followed, but also projects that target invasive alien species regulation, given that invasive alien species are one of the major threats to our nature and biodiversity today. And of course, since the adoption of the new biodiversity strategy that has a number of priorities, some of those priorities, most of those priorities, but not all, are also listed in our call as an element for further prioritization of the project applications. It's a very complex topic in itself, and we have a very useful presentation that was recorded when the current LIFE in the current shape regulation has been adopted in 2021. You can see the link to the YouTube video on my screen, and I highly, if you consider applying for this kind of project, I highly recommend starting with this video from my colleague from DG Environment to better understand the priorities for nature and biodiversity. Example, because I understand it may look a bit theoretical, so I'll give you an example of projects that we have supported in the past that could actually fit in our priorities very well today. Pelican Way of Life is a project, it's an international project that focuses on conservation of the Dalmatian pelican along the Black Sea Mediterranean flyway. And some of you might know it, because actually the project aims to reduce the threats and to improve the habitats in 27 Natura 2000 sites in Romania, Bulgaria, and Greece, thus covering all of the EU breeding range. But there are also some activities in Ukraine. In addition, the project is also establishing the collaboration with other countries where addressing certain threats to the pelican population is required, so for instance Turkey. And it is a major effort for the conservation of this species, not only at the EU but also at the global scale. So this is a typically kind of project that we could support under the standard action project call that is focusing on a species. Another good example is a Latvian project, GrassLife, which is focusing on restoring EU priority grasslands and promoting their multiple use. So here the main aim is the restoration and improvement of 1,320 hectares of EU priority grasslands and to promote their multiple use in Latvia within 14 Natura 2000 sites. So you can already see how ambitious the scope of LIFE project is. I mean, more than 1,300 hectares covered by one single LIFE project. But it has also, I like this project because it has actually very interesting economic dimension, because it is aiming at establishment of a long-term grazing system integrated into farming practices and set up the mobile grazing units. And it's also going to prepare recommendations for rural development plans and in the identification of hotspots for the restoration and protection. It also aims at identification and marketing of grassland products with high added value. There is a very strong attempt, in other words, to make this project, to make the management of the grasslands more economically viable for the stakeholders who are responsible for their management and might be currently abandoning those practices because it may no longer make economic sense. So this element of long-term sustainability. So we are not only talking about the grassland restoration, but also making this restoration and management sustainable, looking for solutions to that. It's a very strong feature of standard action projects that target life, standard action projects under Nature and Biodiversity sub-program. So in other words, we look for the solutions, we restore, but we also make sure that our investment is sustainable, so that we can benefit from those restored habitats in the long term. So that's, let's say, the first topic I discussed. Now the smaller topic, the very specific one that focuses on nature governance. As I mentioned, it's a very specific topic, very narrow, which focuses on compliance assurance with compliance assurance with EU legislation. So there's a very strong focus on enforcement, compliance, very strong focus on access to justice, right to executing properly the right to environmental information, etc. This type of projects are not designed in Nature and Biodiversity sub-program to raise awareness. Awareness raising activities can be included in the previous topic that I just mentioned to you, but not here. Here, really, the main focus is nature governance, is governance, enforcement, and access to justice in the field of nature and biodiversity policy area. So to make it maybe a bit less dry and to help you visualize what we mean, I would like to share with you an example of currently running a life governance project that actually would fit today. It was supported in the past, but today it would fit perfectly into these priorities. So it's Life Nature Guardians project. It's a project that is implemented in Spain and Portugal, and it focuses on minimizing the incidence of environmental crimes. And the main aim is to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of actions to combat environmental crime in those two countries, and especially the crimes committed against wildlife. What the project does, well, it focuses to a large extent on exchange of experiences and best practices in combating wildlife. It strengthens the proper enforcement and implementation of environmental and criminal law. So in other words, there is a lot of cooperation with the police officers, with the judges, and a lot of training of those professional groups, so they know, so the enforcement of the relevant law is more effective. There is also a very strong prevention component, so preventing environmental crime by also promoting socio-cultural change. And very important element, very important outcome of this project is the reduction of impunity and increasing the, let's say, effectiveness and the determination of those responsible for, basically reducing the incentives for committing those environmental crimes. So a very interesting project, but as you can see, very specific, not really focused on the restoration or improvement of the conservation status as such, but really on the governance. So I hope you understand now better the difference between the two topics and the standard action projects for nature and biodiversity, and you have an idea where your project could fit best. So these were the standard action projects. So the very universal ones, accessible to everyone. Now I would like to say a couple of words on strategic nature projects, because it is also an interesting option. As I mentioned before, strategic nature projects is a type of integrated project that focuses on the implementation of prioritized action framework required by the Habitats Directive, or other plans or strategies adopted at the international, national, or regional level that directly relate to nature and biodiversity. We are talking about the projects that are implemented at large territorial scale with the involvement of all the concerned stakeholders and through the mobilization of additional resources and actions. And again, to help you visualize it, how this really works in practice, I have an example of a Spanish integrated project. It's Life Intermares, and its main focus is on integrated, innovative, and participatory management for Natura 2000 network in the marine environment. And here you can see exactly how this project fits into the very specific requirements of integrated projects. So the main aim is to implement the plan. The plan is the prioritized action framework for Natura 2000 in the Spanish marine Natura 2000 network. The authorities responsible for the implementation have an ambition to ensure that by the end of the project there is a consolidated network of marine Natura 2000 sites managed in a demonstrative, effective, and integrated way, with the active participation of the sectors involved with research also as a basic tool for management. So you can see the first element of an integrated project, the plan. Now, second element, large territorial scale. So the Spanish marine Natura 2000 network has 273 sites. It's more than 8.5 million hectares in the Spanish Sea. So you can see in territorial terms, it's not a small project, it's big. Competent authority is involved in the project. So competences in the marine environment fall mainly on the national authorities in Spain. So more than 95% of the surface, and those authorities are part of the project consortium. Complementary funding and activities is also part of the design of the project. So since the beginning of the project, Life Intermares promoted more 270 additional projects that are linked to this project with the support of more than 20 million euros. And the direct objective of those other complementary projects, not the direct objective, but the function of those other projects is to support the implementation also of the prioritized action framework. So to advance, in other words, the same objective that this project is pursuing. So to join forces. And finally, stakeholders. The project is very active in reaching out to other organizations, and stakeholders that without whom the implementation and effective management of the Spanish marine network wouldn't be possible. And these are, for instance, fishermen, but also researchers, tourist operators, etc., etc. So a very wide array of different stakeholder groups. All right, so That is, in principle, all that I would like to share with you at this point about nature and biodiversity subprogram. So I hope from you have now a better idea between the two open calls, SAPs and SNAPs, which one could potentially serve better your needs. And as mentioned, if you are interested in SNAP, if you are a public authority responsible for plans that relate in one way to another to nature legislation, you can reach out to us and we can discuss the concept for such project. I can see we have 3 minutes before we should move to another presentation. So this doesn't leave us for much room for questions on this particular subprogram. But I could try maybe to answer one or two, and the rest we can answer in the afternoon. My problem is I don't see the question. Maybe I can stop sharing so I can see. I don't know if there are any questions. I don't know if my colleagues followed the chat to see.
There is one from Delhi.
Mm-hmm.
Delhi Saavedra is asking if the list of species and habitats of birds and habitats are active, the ones that will be used to establish the priority habitats and species for Ukraine or Ukrainian national legislation.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have presented the conditions of the call. Obviously the Birds and Habitats Directive is the main reference prescribed in the call. Your question actually requires the interpretation against the provisions of the association agreement of Ukraine to LIFE program. So I need to give the floor to my colleagues from DG Environment to answer this question.
Yes, thanks a lot, Maya, for the question. I'm replying in the chat because basing on the multi-annual program, we are also applying the red list and the red list and the IUCN red list of species or habitats. Then if there is any specific needs related to the situation of Ukraine, we can, of course, analyze this during the assessment of the call for proposal.
Thank you, Lucilla. I still don't see the chat, so are there any more questions that were unanswered?
Not that I see.
Okay. Well, in this case, I suggest we move on to this last presentation before coffee break, and we move to environment. And I would like to warmly invite Fabio Leone to take the floor, who will share with you the information about sub-program for circular economy and quality of life.
Thanks
Fabio, please, the floor
Thanks
is
a lot, Maya. Just to check if you can hear me well, just to be sure.
Yes, we can hear you well.
Okay. So thank you, Maya, and thanks a lot for this opportunity to present you the Circular Economy and Quality of Life sub-program. Fabio Leone, I'm the head of sector in CINEA, dealing with the with the Circular Economy and Quality of Life sub-program. I hope you are not too tired already with so much information being given. Next slide, please. Well, in a way, Maya already introduced you to these terms and their qualification. So you know that the standard action project in a nutshell are projects which are really going to the ground. What I would wish to say also that sometimes there is a misunderstanding around the standard action projects we see in the current application. This is not a research program, so purely research projects are not for life. Certainly, there can be some residual research part of any implementation of a project, but shouldn't be the core of the grant. So the SAP, in the case of the environment, same as for the nature, we want to demonstrate and promote innovative techniques, spread best practice, and implement legislation or supporting the implementation of legislation. I think this has all been said. Typically in the circular economy and quality of life, the typical size of a grant, you see it on the screen, is between 700,000 and 6 million per project. As was said before, there is no limit below or upwards, but this is normally the size of the grants that we receive. And normally they last between 3 to 5 years. Obviously, there are exceptions of projects that last only 2 years, project that goes up to 7 years, 8 years. But there are exceptions. Normally are this. For the case of strategic interdependent projects, again, definitions and what they do was well explained by Maya. And I think even the size, you see the typical size is between 10 to 20 million, and the duration is normally between 6 to 10 years. Now, in the quality of life and circular economy, what are our priorities? Well, it's a bit challenging. This would have needed around 20 slides. So it is condensed in one. Sorry for that. But you will find all the information related to the priorities in the call documents, so don't worry. But here it's a nutshell what we are dealing with. It's very broad. So we start with the circular economy downstream. So all those issues related to the recovery of resources from waste, typically the recycling activities on different waste streams. We move to the other aspects of the circular economy, so the upstream aspect. So the design of solutions which are avoiding the impacts at source when you design the products or the solution you are proposing. Implementation, transfer, uptake of solutions which improve durability, reuse, reparability, recyclability, etc. These are the two elements of the circular economy. Then we have soil. Here again, broad activities to protect the soil, to restore it in case of pollution, or improve the properties of the soil. Air, it's focusing on air emissions, specifically also on particulate matters and sustainable road transport. We also have this year a specific priority for noise. The priority is concentrated on in densely populated urban areas. Chemicals, it's about prevention and reduction of impact of hazardous chemicals, but also the upstream side, so the design of chemicals that are safe, sorry for the playing of words, safe by design solutions. Water, again, broad type of priorities covering water quality, water quantity, so reduction of use of water, improvement of water services, and also the marine and coastal water management. Then finally, the last two, it's governance. This is grants to support, for example, the capacity building of national administration in dealing with environmental issues. Also, for example, the environmental compliance with legislations, and awareness raising and behavioral change support for citizens and for public authorities. Finally, this was recently introduced, the Bauhaus initiative. This is a flagship initiative by the European Commission and by the President, launched by the President von der Leyen. It is the combination, let's say, the combination of aesthetic functionality, affordability to the environment solutions that are presented. So the combination of good solutions which are not only solving an environmental problem, but they do it taking care, for example, of the wildlife and biodiversities, and also that they not only improve the environment, but also the quality of life of the citizens. This is the priorities for the standard action project related to the integrated project already presented. The focus is on national plans, and it is targeted to national authorities for the implementation of plans. A number of plans are listed from circular economy action plans to river management plans to waste management plans, and so on and so on. I think this was said already. In green, it's those new plans that were introduced in the new programming period of the LIFE program. So next, a few facts about the call 2022 for SAP and for SIP. For SAP this year we have around 98 million for projects. It's one stage application, so you submit the full package in once. It was opened the 17th of May, and the deadline is the 4th of October, so quite soon. For the case of the strategic integrated projects, the budget is this year for the year 2022 is 53 million euro. It's two-stage, so you submit the first concept note, a summary of your project this is actually very soon, so this in September. Then those that are selected, they will be invited to provide a full proposal by March 2023. Now, I think the examples speaks more than 1,000 words. A few examples of what actually are the typical projects that we do finance in the strategic action projects. This is an example I pick up on waste. It's focusing on construction and demolition waste, and it is about polyester expanded and extruded. This is typically material that is used in construction for insulation, and it's also material that is not very easy to recycle because it's contaminated. These panels, they do have to contain certain fire retardant and flame retardant. This A, B, C, D that I'm not going to spell out. It's simply talking about flame retardant. So the idea here is we have a lot of this waste that goes to landfill and lost in Europe. And these projects, it's on an industrial scale to try to target this problem. On the one hand, recovering the polystyrene from the material, and on the other, also recovering the bromine, so this fire retardant, flame retardant part. It's a collaboration that goes across all Europe. You see there what they aim to achieve in terms of installations to be able to manage and reduce the waste of 1,000 tons per year, and recover also a large amount of bromine. This is, can you go to the next one? Maya? Yeah, this is really an implementation at industrial scale. And it involves more than 70 different actors across the entire value chain. So from the manufacturers of polystyrene to the recyclers, the converters, the waste suppliers, and so on. So it's a huge potential at the European level to tackle the issues of polystyrene waste. Now, another example, this is under the priority of air. It's a Finnish coordinated project, and it's about green foundry, so solutions for greening the foundries. It's an innovative inorganic binder that will improve indoor air quality and also purify and reuse the contaminated foundry sands. This is we have a quite large impact of this project. That the budget of this project is 2 million overall, and our contribution is around 1 to 1.2 million. So you see the objectives on the slides: 80% reduction of airborne emissions, improve air quality by 70% in foundries, and also reduce the hazardous elements within the sand of 75%. So it's a rather ambitious, and this is not only a Finnish initiated project. There are at least 5 or 6 countries from Italy, Spain, France, Germany, and Poland involved in this project. So it's rather pan-European activities. Now, the next one, we move a bit. These were two standard action projects, a couple of examples of integrated project, typical integrated project. You see, I pick up this one from Greece. It's the implementation of the waste national waste prevention plan in Greece with the help of the IP. The size of the project is 60 million budget, and the EULife is contributing with 9.5 million. Of course, the Greece authorities are injecting. I mean, they are using for the implementation of the plan, not just the LIFE projects, but also complementary and funds from around 800 million. It is about a specific issue. The LIFE project is specifically focusing on some demonstrative actions in municipalities to target the issues of collection and management of waste in highland and mountain municipalities. And also they have going to be set up certain reuse centers in Athens and Thessaloniki, and finally also working on indicators for circular economy and financial instruments to improve the situation. The duration of this project is 8 years. Then the next one is another example of an integrated project, this time on water, and it is in Latvia. 40 million euro total budget with our contribution of 8.7 million. This is the implementation of river basin management plans in Latvia. There are actually 4 river basin management plans in Latvia. You see that corresponds to the 4 regions. You see the map on the bottom right of the slide. So it's a large intervention, 164 water bodies at risk in Latvia, and obviously there is pressure from agriculture and the modification of the hydrological and morphological landscape. The project also will support specific grants at small scale local initiatives in Latvia. So that's another type of, there are actually plenty of projects. I would really recommend you that you consult, if you go to, I think it's the next slide, that you also presented, you consult the LIFE project database, you look at projects, probably it's useful that you look at projects between 2014, 2020, that are the most recent one. And you get really a flavor of the type of project, the type of activities that we finance, the results of these projects. That's, I think, a very good starting point to have a flavor of the type of intervention that we support. Thank you. I don't know if there are questions. I was concentrating on the slides. I was not looking to the chat. What is the average competition? I just pick up one that I see, competition rates for different projects. This, I think it's a more generic. I don't know if we have time to respond, Maya.
Yes, we do. We have 15
Okay.
minutes, so we have time.
Let's say the success rate, I didn't bring with me the statistics. Normally, we are ranging from, in the case of the environment, it's around between 10%, 20%. let's say, success rate in the case of the full proposal. One stage. This is normally which is in the frame of the European funding rather high, because you can go up to the lower level of, for example, the research programs, which is 2%, 3%. So it's still very competitive, I'm afraid, but not as much as other programs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for nature and biodiversity, yeah, the level of competition is even higher, simply because the budgets requested for standard action projects are going up every year. So it's indeed the excellent quality proposals that have a chance to be financed.
Then
okay, I see that was answered. Sorry, I see Angelo answered already.
But we answered in the same way, so
yes.
at least we are consistent.
Sorry.
There is another question about from Delhi and nature again, and one from Luba on infrastructural activities and the level of details required.
Mm-hmm.
If we plan any infrastructure activity, should we have a budget and estimated documentation for such activity? Yes. I mean, infrastructure is an eligible cost. Of course, LIFE is not a program that finance large infrastructures, so the budget shouldn't focus only on infrastructure. It can be part of the project. Yeah, and it should be documented. If you present, you claim for certain cost of infrastructure, then you have to present it in the proposal.
Yeah, but I guess, Fabio, if I may, that
yeah,
Luba refers directly to a real project, so the reply is no. You could even use the LIFE money to prepare the final project for your infrastructure.
Oh, thank you very much, because if the project is for 6 years and we are planning to build something, so we don't know where it will be built. So we can develop this documentation in the frame of the project for the LIFE money. Am I right?
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Still at the level of the proposal, you will put a price tag to that, an estimated cost of that infrastructure. And we need to have some details to understand what the infrastructure will be. How did you come to that price? Not necessarily the final the definition, but at least some estimation that shows that indeed it's feasible and that you understand what you want to do, and you can explain why you need to do that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And then the other two questions, I think the one from Delhi and the last one from Victor are probably for Lucilla.
Yes, yes, thanks, Angelo. For the purpose of life financing, we can consider the Emerald network equivalent to the Natura 2000 network, and we are completing all the legal, let's say, procedure for this, but for the evaluation of the proposal, this will be the solution adopted. In fact, to be clear, the agreement for the association of Ukraine to LIFE was signed in a record time. So now we are running behind to try to make to try to find all the solution to allow the best participation possible for Ukraine.
And then we have a question from Irina, I think.
What documents are required for application? I think the best would be for you to look at to go to the call list, and there you find all the documents that are required for application. There is a template that you need to use, a Word document that you need to use to write your application, but also other templates.
But Just for Irina, don't be afraid. We're not asking you a lot of formal documents at the beginning. It's whatever refers, for example, to proving the existence of the legal entity that you represent, and all these kind of documents. They come into play only at a very late stage if you are successful, when we get into what we call the grant agreement preparation. So at the beginning, the most important thing is really your project proposal. And you will have to fill in a few additional administrative forms, but they are just containing administrative details, like, I don't know, the address of the department you represent, the contact person, how long the project will last, and a rather simple budget form where you show us how much money you will need for the project. The most cumbersome is indeed the description of your activities, the project proposal itself, which is what Fabio mentioned as a Word form, which will later on be transformed into a PDF and annexed to your proposal. But that's the description of the project. I don't see any other question currently.
No. We have a bit more time.
Luba, your hand is still raised because you want to ask an additional question, or it's from before? Okay.
Sorry. I forgot to.
Okay, it's okay. Don't worry.
Yeah, there's one more question. Can proposal be welcoming people from Ukraine in Albania? I'm not sure I fully understand. You mean if there can be activities implemented in Albania? Perhaps you could take the floor to explain.
Yeah. And then there is another one about.
I see exactly. Well, I mean, in principle, activities, let's say, outside the EU member states or outside the countries associated to LIFE program are eligible, as long as these activities support directly the objectives of the project implemented, well, in your case, in the country associated to LIFE. So if you need some activities, if you need to implement some activities in Albania in order to achieve environmental or climate action objectives inside Ukraine, that can be considered. But as Albania is currently not associated to LIFE program, this has to be an angle. I don't know if I answered your question. There is another question: how is the selection process going? What are the criteria? The criteria are defined in the what we call call document. So when you go to the tenders portal and you choose the call that interests you, you will find the call document. The call document will define the priorities that we have shared with you today, and we will continue sharing after the break, as well as specific call conditions, including the selection criteria. So you will see that the criteria are divided into a couple of categories. There are, let's say, administrative criteria that relate to, let's say, eligibility of the participants. But the most important criteria, let's say, that define the competition between the projects are what we call the award criteria. And they are different criteria for standard action projects and other actions, and different ones for integrated projects. The ones for standard actions and other actions include relevance. So basically, in a nutshell, that's where we check the compliance with the priorities and that are defined in the call and the LIFE program and the overall concept of the project. Another criterion is technical coherence. So how well the application is presented, how the actions support the implementation of the results, and how the design of the project supports implementation, achievement of the results and the objectives. We also look here at this catalytic effect that I mentioned. I'm really implying in a nutshell. And the other criterion is impact, a very important one, because it's actually it has the highest weight, where we, depending on the sub-program, look at the effects of the project on the ground. But this is also where we look at the sustainability of the actions. And the final criterion, financial, let's say financial aspects. So the financial design of the project and its value for money. Now for standard action projects, we also have a number of bonus points. And for integrated projects, the criteria are the same, but we also have additional criterion. I'm talking about the full stage, so the full proposal, where we look at this particular aspect of integrated projects, which is the mobilization of additional funds and resources, and how credible the strategy to reach this is. There is also, so that's, let's say, the nutshell, the criteria. They are scored from 0 to 20 points. And there is, on our website, there are videos where we explain in more detail how those criteria are considered. So I strongly recommend looking into those.
Then there is another one from Natalia that asking, can company be a coordinator or project leader of LIFE without having previous experience of cooperation in the framework of H2020 or other relevant programs? Are there some requirements? No, there are no requirements. You can participate to LIFE actually without having previous experience. Whichever is your intention, applying now or applying in the future, I would really recommend that you get hands-on on the tool and on the templates, and you try to see what kind of information is requested. It's not difficult, although some may come to you saying that it is not. It requires a bit of time. But please do try to see in practice, download the templates from the portal, and you will see the structure, the type of information we do require where to submit a proposal.
Then you have a question, can graduate students apply and participate in the program? The graduate students are physical persons. No physical person can apply to LIFE, but certainly they can participate, like any employee of a company that participates in a LIFE project will participate in the LIFE project. So a student can participate in the LIFE project activities, provided the student is paid, supported, employed, engaged, whatever, by one of the entities, what we call the beneficiaries, which are legal entities only, that participate in the project itself. Then I wanted to add one thing to the question before that was raised concerning Albania, because as long as Albania is not associated to LIFE, Albania is considered for LIFE as a third country, and the activities in Albania, they are indeed eligible, but by way of exception, based on one of the articles of the LIFE regulation. So they must be absolutely necessary to achieve the results either in Ukraine or in another member states or in another associated countries to LIFE. So it's not simply collaboration or an activities that will contribute to the project that is eligible in Albania. It must be essential. So the classical example is you have a migratory bird that spends part of the time in Ukraine and part of their life in Albania. And unless you carry out specific activities in Albania, the results on the population in Ukraine will be nil. Then in that case, you might have evidence that proves that you absolutely need to work in Albania. So that's the present situation, but it is indeed possible.
There's also a question about river basin management plans and whether development is more suitable for standard action projects, I guess, as opposed to SIPs.
Generally, it's implementation rather than development. If you can combine the two in a SAP, but to be honest, I think not. But we can check in specific if there is space for that.
Yes, indeed. Well, typically our integrated projects that are based on an existing plan may have an activities which lead to update of the plan so that we have a new version of the plan. But in principle, well, the plan must be in place to have an integrated project. Yeah. There is also a question, will a manager be provided to work on the development of projects from the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Natural Resources of Ukraine? I'm not sure we can answer this question. I think it's the question for the ministry. Are the collaborations consortia wished between Ukrainian entities and some from other EU member states regarding projects in Ukraine, such as solar construction, solar energy supply in Ukraine?
Sure, I think so, yes. Consortium is always welcome, and they increase the value added and the potential for replication of the solution proposed. So, yes.
Okay. Other requirements where the leading partner should be based. Yes, you should be based either in the EU member state or the country associated to the LIFE program, so in Ukraine. Or Iceland, because Iceland is also associated. So these are the options. There is additional information about river basin management plans. Well, actually, the requirement is to have the plan in place by the time there is a deadline for the submission of the full proposal. Probably not in this round because the deadline will be 2023, but already next call, next year, you could consider applying for the project for a SIP based on river basin management plan.
Yeah.
So that's a good news that they are coming. I'm a bit torn because we are now 5 minutes after time. So I think also out of the respect of the work of the interpreters, we should take a break. But we can come back with those questions after the lunch break if they, because after the, because after the coffee break, we will continue with climate action and clean energy transition. However, before we pause, I need to confess I made a mistake in my slides, but luckily my vigilant colleagues have spotted it during my presentation. Thank you so much, Zoe, for being so vigilant and spotting it. So I will show you what the mistake was and what was the mistake. So the mistake was actually very serious because it concerns the application deadlines for standard action projects. Previously, I showed you here November, while in reality it is 4th of October. So it's very important to bear in mind that the deadline is in October. I'm very sorry for this mistake. It has been now corrected, and when you will receive the presentations at the end, after our meeting, it will be with the correct deadline. So very important, standard action projects, the deadline is the 4th of October 2022 for all 3 sub-programs, not November. Thank you again, Zoe, for spotting it. We will now take a break and we will reconvene at 11 and we will continue, at 11 Brussels time. And if I'm not mistaken, 12 your time. Yeah, 12 o'clock your time in Ukraine, and we will continue with climate action. Thank you so much for your attention and see you at 12. I believe we can start if everyone is ready. All right. Just before we jump into climate action, I would like to mention that we have, in the meantime, in the interest of saving time, answered the question from Świętosław and Economia in the chat, so you can find the answers to your questions written there. All right, with no further ado, we will now move to the next sub-program of LIFE, which is LIFE Climate Action. I am very pleased to welcome to our virtual stage my colleague Bernd, who will be sharing with you the information about this sub-program. Bernd, I share your presentation and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maya. So good morning, everyone. Already it has gone, so it's towards lunchtime. I'm Bernd Decker, responsible for the LIFE sub-program Climate Action, head of sector as well. I will present you in this short presentation mainly typical project examples which we fund or co-fund under climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation. And I will also go into the macro level priorities for this call period. The sub-program Climate Action was established in 2014 and is compared to the entire LIFE program a rather young part or sub-program of the program. The responsible Directorate General of the European Commission, which is the DG Climate Action, they provide the overall policy context. They define also the priorities, define the priorities for the annual calls, and they are also supportive and help us in the selection of projects. The sub-program is organized in 3 priority areas, which you can see in the bottom left corner, which is CCM, which stands for climate change mitigation, so reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The second priority area is climate change adaptation, meaning to adapt to the effects of climate change to make the society more resilient. And thirdly, governance in climate action, supporting civil society, changing behavior towards more climate or supporting climate neutrality. The policies which are behind, maybe just stay back the previous slide. The policies which are behind these priorities are defined in the Green Deal, or the overarching umbrella is the Green Deal, with the cut of greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030, and to reach climate neutrality mid-century, so in 2050. So that's the main goal of climate policy, which is set out in the climate law, which was adopted last year. The climate law also spells out in Chapter 5 the duty to adapt, and based on the climate law, we have the European adaptation strategy. So this is the main policy which relates to the adaptation. So those are the 2 main areas or policy areas you should have a look into when applying for climate action. So now please, next slide. So I would like to highlight under climate change mitigation some few areas and give you a flavor of the types of projects which we are funding under climate change mitigation. One important policy priority is to phase down fluorinated gases, the use of fluorinated gases and other ozone depleting substances. So these kind of gases, which we call F gases, fluorinated gases, they can be found in many domestic and industrial appliances, such as air conditioning, such as high voltage switch gears, refrigeration. So in this area, we have a number of projects where the applicants, they develop new solutions in terms of reducing the fluorinated gases in these kind of appliances or replace them with other substances. So, for example, there's one project, an Italian company producing domestic ice cream machines. So in the upper left corner. So they produce this new type of machine by using an material which is less harmful to the ozone layer and less powerful in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And they produce this machine and put them well for the market, for the European market, or on the European market for sale for the regular citizens. Other project, we fund the replacement of refrigerants in supermarket chains where, of course, these cooling sections require not only a lot of energy, but also the appliances which use harmful substances. Also here, there are entities reducing these substances. Industrial partners or energy suppliers, network organizations, and that's the upper middle picture. The high voltage switch gears, they contain for insulation purpose also these highly potent greenhouse gases or fluorinated gases. Also here we have companies, global companies even engaged here, replacing these kind of gases and developing new types of high voltage circuit breakers for industrial appliances. But not only the replacement of these substances are important, it's also the recycling and the reclamation of these substances where we have projects working on this. So those are really industrial projects with industrial partners. We had the questions in the chat before. Yes, we have private entities being coordinators and sometimes even single applicants in proposing very innovative proposals to replace these gases. The next slide, please. The second important policy priority for this call is to reduce energy consumption in energy-intensive industries. So that can be steel industry, glass industry, ceramics, cement, chemical industry. We have quite a number of projects, for example, in the glass industry, where they use or they developed new technologies for heat recovery to lower the energy consumption, the gas consumption, for example, which is a very serious issue right now, as we all know, given the current circumstances. Particularly the glass industry is suffering from this, and they want or have to avoid the risk of cuts from gas and not to damage their production lines. So very relevant for them. In the steel industry, they're looking into new ways, new efficient burners, but also in new ways how to either replace coke from fossil coal by using waste streams from, for example, plastics, and use this in the internal processes. And this is also leading towards a decarbonization of the industry, of the steel industry, by replacing in the long term the coke with hydrogen. In the ceramics industry, we have a very successful project in Italy in the ceramic belt, where tableware, but also products for bathrooms, toilets, sinks, and so on are produced, where they have built a new type of kiln, which is considerably reducing the input of energy, of gas again, and increasing the efficiency, and as a consequence, lowering the CO2 emissions. Cement industry also very important. We have large global actors in the cement industry in participating in EULife, where they find new ways, new type of cement, sometimes I would say even risky engagement in terms of the technology, where the EULife program is really happy to provide the co-funding to cover these kind of risks in trying to test new products, to see whether the products are suitable for the construction sector, for example, and at the end reducing CO2 emissions again. So, for example, there's one project, they developed a new type of cement which is curing in chambers which are supplied with CO2, and ideally CO2 which is extracted from the exhaust of the cement factory. And there are quite a number of benefits of this new product, that the time for curing is shortened. Within 24 hours the product can be used and can be shipped, which has quite advantages to many actors in the value chain. Next slide, please. So we are not only dealing with industrial processes under climate change mitigation. We know that about 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions, they come from agriculture and land use practices. So quite a number of the projects under climate change mitigation, which we co-finance, are working with forestry organizations, with farmers associations, to improve the land management practices. That could be, for example, improving the ability of forests to store more carbon, so to look at natural carbon sinks and to increase the capacities of natural carbon sinks. Peatlands is also a very important area and aspects. You have seen examples from Latvia, for example, in the previous presentations, and we share to a certain extent with this type of projects, but also in other areas, the work on peatlands to reduce CO2 emissions from wrong practices in peatland areas, for example, or even help to re-vet peatland areas to enable those areas which are very potent areas for capturing CO2 to help to have restoration work there. But also we have sea management practices where, for example, in Spain, Posidonia bats are, or endangered Posidonia bats are better protected, because we know they are also important carbon sinks. We also work directly with farming, with dairy farms, for example, to look into possibilities or the beneficiaries into possibilities how the feeding of animals could be done more climate friendly. One important keyword here I would like to mention is carbon farming, and I would assume that Ukraine, with the huge potential in terms of its agriculture, could be well suited in this context to provide examples and to engage in, for example, carbon farming practices. Next slide, please. So just an overview of what are the priorities. So the first one, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in all sectors which are not covered by the European emission trading system. So that can also be in transport, in buildings, in industry. But I made the focus here on the reduction of fluorinated greenhouse gases and ozone depleting substances. The second priority is the enhancement of the functioning of the emission trading system, which has an impact on the energy and greenhouse gas intensive industrial production. So I've provided examples for this. For the third priority, the generation and the use of renewable energy and improvement of energy efficiency. Yes, we have also projects here investing in renewable energy, increasing efficiency, for example, of solar or photovoltaic systems, or to find new ways of applying photovoltaic systems to buildings and retrofitting of buildings. And this is something which we do very closely with our colleagues under LIFE Clean Energy Transition. And the last one, the development of land sea management practices, which have an impact on emissions and removals of emissions in enhancement of natural carbon sinks. Next one, please. Now I move to climate change adaptation. We all know, in particular this year, I don't know how the situation is in Ukraine, in Central and Western Europe. We are faced with a severe drought again after 2018 and 2019. So we are confronted with a situation again where we have enormous heat with the results of forest fires, but not only forest fires, but also enormous heat island effects in urban areas. Please, next click. So we are here in a situation where the information base still is rather modest, where we also need to increase the information base, the database, to see what are we actually confronted with, and to find the appropriate measures to counteract to this kind of effects from climate change. So we have a couple of interesting projects, for example, Life Herotile, where they develop new types of tiles for particularly for the Mediterranean area, hotter areas where the tiles allow a certain ventilation and reduce the cooling by air conditioning. Or the greening of cities, of course, is a very important aspect where we have very good examples. For example, in Poland, city of Radom, where they are experimenting with new types of greening measures, not only greening of roofs or enhancing the green areas, the green spaces, but also using unconventional measures like a bus stop, which is a system in itself which has a green roof, a water saving technology underneath, which is used for irrigation. So a complex system, but something which is appreciated by the public because it is cooling down the bus stops while people waiting for the bus to come. Next slide, please. We have other examples in vulnerable areas. The increased wind and storms, even tornadoes, are causing lots of damages in already weakened forests, for example. So also here we are trying to adapt the forest to move away from previous times of monocultures to have more diverse forests and to increase the biodiversity also in the forest. So it goes hand in hand with biodiversity. Important projects like Via in Italy, which is addressing a huge storm damage from a couple of years ago, or Life Forecast to increase the biodiversity in forests. Next slide, please. And we're also addressing, or the project address the issue of flooding, which can be caused by heavy rains, can be caused by landslides, or by rivers or the sea. So we are trying to support again in projects, very innovative projects like Life Airfit, where they try in densely populated areas to implement a technology which is able to get rid of excess water very quickly. But also nature-based solutions are very important. Stone Walls for Life, where old technologies are revitalized to avoid landslides, to make the landscape, a vulnerable landscape, more adapted to climate change. Next slide, please. So this is the last one on climate change adaptation, just to visualize to you the local authorities which are engaged in live climate adaptation projects. I also would like to mention EU mission on climate change adaptation here, because we are working very closely together on this. And currently we, around 180 local authorities receive funding to develop measures in their cities, mainly nature-based solutions, small nature-based solutions in a demonstrative character, and about 200 million euros are invested here, of which we approximately co-finance 100 million. Next slide, please. So the priorities here, 9 in total for climate change adaptation. The first 2, they refer mainly to the improvement of the data situation and the modeling capacities. So developing state-of-the-art tools and solutions for actual implementation of measures. The third priority is nature-based solutions in the management of land, coast, and marine areas. The fourth priority is adapting cities and regions to climate change. The fifth one is climate proofing and resilience of infrastructure and buildings. Again, here we have examples where infrastructure is damaged either by flooding, but also by heat. The sixth one, adaptation solutions for farmers, forest managers, Natura 2000 managers, and other land managers. The seventh priority is focusing on water management in general. So looking at flooding situations, reducing the risk of floods. And that goes well hand in hand with preparedness for extreme weather events, where forecasting plays an important role, and well, finally also bringing the financing institutions, the insurance institutions on board to see how risks can be mitigated, and in case of damages, the burden on citizens being alleviated. Next slide, please. So the third priority, policy priority, is climate change governance. Here we are looking at proposals which help to address the behavior of citizens, behavior of certain multiplier groups, industrial groups. So here we ask for ideas to improve anything which is increasing the resilience of the communities, but also to address the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So, for example, we have one important area which is related to the better functioning of the European emission trading system. So for this, we have this kind of governance projects, a handful. We are looking at transport, also transport emissions, and we have a project here where the civil society is closely looking at the industry, the car manufacturers, in terms of the consumption of light-duty vehicles, heavy trucks, also passenger cars, and to close the gap between the actual consumption to what is advertised by the industry. We have important governance projects for floods prevention, where the citizens are taken on board, and together with citizens, new flood prevention methods will be tested, discussed and tested. An important keyword here is the Climate Pact. So the DG Climate Action, they've adopted the Climate Pact, which is trying to engage citizens to provide pledges for improving the climate situation in cities in vulnerable areas. So next slide, please, for the priorities. So we have quite a number of priorities here. The first one is the support of the operation of the European Climate Pact, incentivizing behavior change, raising awareness-raising activities. Sustainable finance action is important, because we know the finance sector is very crucial in terms of its investments in technologies. Monitoring and reporting is an important aspect. I mentioned the assessment and the functioning of the EU ETS, the phasing out of the fluorinated gases. So you can see that the climate change governance project, they also refer back to priorities which are listed under climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation. So my last slide, the next one, refers to the strategic integrated projects. The mechanism of how they work and how they are differentiated or differ from standard action projects were explained by the previous speakers. Just a few examples here, because in climate action we also have strategic integrated projects. And here maybe a slight addition I would like to mention is that not only public authorities can submit strategic integrated projects under climate action. It could also be the private sector, for example, industry associations or commercial associations, which have developed a roadmap or contributing to an important roadmap in lowering CO2 emissions. So a couple of examples here. We have a number of integrated projects looking at the phasing out of coal in the energy production and for heating purposes, very much in Poland, for example, but also in Spain, in Eastern Germany, Western Germany, where we have still a high share of lignite extraction and burning in coal plants, in electricity plants. So the phasing out of coal is accompanied by a transition mechanism, just transition. The director Dirk Beckers already mentioned there is a particular program here in the agency, and with our integrated projects we are contributing to this aspect of just transition. We also support the the hydrogen economy, one strong important project in the North Italian region, where the production of hydrogen from water-powered electricity plants is making progress together with the increase of the fueling infrastructure. But not only this, the one important purpose is on their strategy to reduce the CO2 emissions in that region is to bring organizations like fleet operators on board. It could be the bus operator of the cities. It could be other private entities which are keen and willing to switch to more carbon neutral transport modes, including also the tourism industry. So you see there are multi-stakeholder actions, these integrated projects, to embrace not only one sector, but to try to work with different sectors together. And also climate change adaptation. We have quite a number of integrated projects, an important one coast to coast in the Danish region of Jutland, where they develop mechanisms in making the regions more resilient to climate change, and they're trying out a lot of new innovative technologies, permeable surfaces on roads, heavily used roads, for example, with storage capacities for water underground, and for making this realizing these kind of projects, complementary funding kicks in, sometimes billions of euros, which help them to roll out the demonstrations which are being tested and demonstrated in our LIFE projects. So with this, I would like to close, and I would hand over then to Annette, my colleague Annette, to continue with clean energy transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernd. Just one thing before we switch to clean energy transition. I think I have seen one question that concerned CO2 emissions. Perhaps we could very quickly answer it. I don't know if you can see it on your screen.
Yeah, I can see. So the question is, could the project's goal to be to achieve the reduction of CO2 emissions through integration, the energy efficiency projects on the power generation on TPPs? What is TPP?
Thermal power plant.
Thermal power plant. Thank you. That's a policy question. To a certain extent, yes, but not if the energy efficiency project would then allow for continuing the thermal power plants. It's a very delicate question, I have to admit. I would say not the right person now to give a concise answer on this. So there could be possibilities to have such a proposal. But that would I would suggest for this very specific question to get back to us and also to DG Climate Action, colleagues from DG Climate Action, to see how far we could accept projects to minimize emissions in thermal power plants. But as said, the purpose is to phase out power plants, to accompany the areas, the transition in advancing, for example, renewable energy or moving into hydrogen economy. But please, if this answer is not sufficient for you, please get back to us bilaterally, and we can discuss bilaterally maybe your idea in more detail and see whether it would fit under LIFE climate change mitigation.
All right, thank you, Bernd. I don't know if there are any other pressing climate action questions, because
there is one from also from Natalia on whether we could share the link and give more information to the Polish phase-out project. Yeah, I think we can do that. I mean, we have two big integrated projects in the Malopolska region, which refer to air quality, phasing out of coal-fired boilers. Now with a follow-up project to engage even deeper in the reduction of CO2 emissions in that region, we can provide this information to particularly those two integrated projects to you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have seen in the meantime some, I think, additional questions popping up, but if you allow, we will now proceed with clean energy transition because we are 5 minutes behind. But yes, we will, of course, try to come back and either answer the remaining questions afterwards, or maybe directly in the chat. All right, so we will now move to our final presentation, and I would like to warmly welcome my colleague Annette Jan, who will share with you information about EULife Clean Energy Transition Subprogram. Annette, welcome.
Thank you very much, Maya, for the warm welcome, and also from my side, I'd like to pass my warm welcome to the audience and to our dear colleagues, translators who've been with us since this morning. It's an immense pleasure for me to be with you and to present to you the Clean Energy Transition Program. My name is Annette Jan. I'm working in the Energy and Climate Unit, and I'm one of the head of sectors in charge of the Clean Energy Transition Subprogram. Now, if we can move to the next slide, if my colleague Bernd has kindly said that the climate subprogram is one of the younger parts of life, then probably those of you who know us, you know that we are actually probably the youngest part of life. We've joined life in the year 21 with a clean energy transition program. But having said this, for those of you who know us, you also know that we've moved in a contextual, very interesting and exciting place under the umbrella of life. But our activities, for those of you who know us, they have been actually robustly ongoing over the last 15 years. The latest, and I will also bring you a few examples where also Ukrainian partners actually worked with us on this. The latest funding pathway that we've used was actually the Horizon 2020 program, and there was a funding line on energy efficiency, which produced about 400 projects, which are actually most of them now really live and ongoing. And so we have a whole history that, of course, we bring into the Life Clean Energy Transition Program, and very looking forward to develop the program over time. The mission as such has remained very strong. With the next slide, Life Clean Energy Transition is the key program for EU energy policy implementation. It's a program which is designed to work structurally, really on breaking market barriers, on changing the very fundamentals of how market stakeholders, regulation work together. So normally we are not so keen to describe what we are not, but it's of course probably quite good to precise that Life Clean Energy Transition is not a technology-oriented program. So we are a bit diverse here from our colleagues who also would engage into technological development and testings. That is not very much our remit. Our remit is obviously working with the latest technology, technique, processes, and knowledge, but for the aim of actually improving governance, of improving capacities and skills at all levels, of mobilizing investment and improve really the access to finance the clean energy transition. And in this way, to really stimulate innovative approaches to support directly the implementation of EU legislation, of EU targets and initiatives with, needless to say, with real impact on the ground. This is why you also see on the right-hand side of this slide a few terms which come directly out of our legislative background, of our legislative ecosystem that this program is trying to support. So obviously the main legislative pieces that I'm sure many of you are actually familiar, because we've been, the European Commission has been working for a long time on collaborating on the legislative pieces, the key pieces such as the Energy Efficiency Directive, such as the Building Performance Directive or the Renewable Directive, which of course are all part of the Green Deal and Fit for 55 package. And tragically, obviously, you see a circle which circles also the targets and initiatives which now in the last weeks have been shaped, put into place is probably a bit early, but shaped in order to look out for repowering EU under the tragic events, which obviously you are much more directly concerned from the places where you are. Moving to the next slide. So zooming in from that main objective and from the legislative pieces, targets that this program intends to support across Europe. Here, a first flavor of which type of activities and type of sectors the program is prioritizing. Now, all in all, we would have 5 to 6 key areas of work, which would be fairly stable throughout the whole of the programmation of this program, while, as the other colleagues as well in the other sub-programs, we are working on the basis of annual calls, which articulate these key areas of work into concrete so-called funding topics, and which give really very good detailed guidance to interested stakeholders in cities, municipalities, industries, associations, NGOs, in order to find their way with their innovative ideas, but shaped in a fairly detailed guidance so that they're really contributed directly to the core of the program. Now, as a first flavor, so the main areas of work is that we are engaging a lot in citizen-centric work, so involving and empowering citizens in the clean energy transition. Of course, very natural. So the decarbonization of buildings is one of our biggest or most important pillars of work, and the whole reform of the heating and cooling sector. A lot and a very strong pillar has developed on facilitating investment projects at local and regional level, basically having support for making energy efficiency developers and financing options being matched together in order to accelerate the transition by getting projects moving on the ground. And for that finality, you will be the first ones to know, those working in that area, that is of absolute importance to have the skill base of construction workers, but also the skill base of energy managers in industry and in the service sector, really benefiting from today's knowledge on energy saving measures and on process and governance related learnings, which would optimize their production lines, which would optimize the quality of renovations. And this is why we dedicate a whole strand of work on capacity building for construction workers and industry players. We have a whole line of work working with the public sector, working with the cities and regional governments, but also with national administrations on policy frameworks for the clean energy transition. And last but certainly not least, we all know that it has been a very sensitive area of how to balance out for which energy efficiency or sustainable energy measures to actually use grants and public money, but where can we make a case for energy efficiency to actually attract private finance in order to lever much faster and much bigger amounts of money into this area of work. And that's the remit of our area, attracting private finance. Now, looking at the next 2 slides, actually, here you will find the actual funding topics of this call 2022. So basically where these 6 areas that I outlined you broadly in the earlier slide are really zoomed into concrete funding topics, which are for you, your guiding descriptions in which focused area the program wishes to trigger interest, wishes to trigger your expertise and your ideas of how to move these agenda forwards. Now, 18 funding topics in total. Obviously, that is quite dense to present in a few minutes. So if you allow me, I would basically take you on a helicopter flight across those 18 topics and probably highlighting the one or the other more of which from where we are sitting. We think that they might be of particular interest to you, but obviously that would also very much and foremost depend very much on the needs that you see most pressing. Now, if we start from the left of the slide, the citizen-centric work, here in this call 22, we will be concentrating on 2 topics. The first topic is dedicated to energy poverty and poor energy efficiency of buildings. And the activities supported would be facilitating really renovation models and building related interventions which are tailor-made for vulnerable districts. Here we would be addressing districts or clusters of buildings, and we are really interested in the models of intervention, which can be accompanied with a few testing phases, but really with models which could be scaled up also for other urban areas in similar climate zones, in similar geolocation, with similar regulatory frameworks across Europe. The second topic under the citizen-centric work is devoted to energy communities. Here, you may know that citizen energy communities are actually gaining very fast and under the pressing urgency really rapidly. Importance is basically where citizens can engage to be producing and taking care of their own production and consumption of energy. Here, we would be this year actually calling out for cities, for city administrations, which have an absolutely important role in the development of local energy communities, and to allow them to have the capacity to really structurally set up the legal framework, but also the interest in their constituencies and gather their stakeholders to actually put up very transparent but functioning energy communities into place. Moving to the middle part, the middle column of the slide, decarbonization of buildings and heating and cooling. I said this before, one of the most important centric work of this program, because here we are looking really at the deep renovation of our building stock, where we have very concrete targets in the EU under the Renovation Wave initiative, but of course also under the renegotiated targets, which are for the moment in discussion on the building directive. And this is why this work is so important. There is a whole topic which is called towards a zero emission building stock, but where actually all of the work on deep renovation, be it on the rollout of renovation passports, be it in order to allow regions and cities to adapt their legal administrative funding frameworks, or to allow developing models of how the different actors in the value chain of building renovation can work together. So it's quite open. Because there's simply a lot which needs to be done. And so we've tried to really craft this funding topic in a way to find the most pressing priorities, which also are shared by our stakeholders. The next 3 topics are fairly focused, so I'll just quickly read out their titles. The next one would be devoted to new instruments under our European building performance legislation, instruments with a smart readiness, and energy performance certification, where of course it's a steady long-term work, structural work to get the energy performance labeling and combined with the smart readiness indicators being picked up by the market. The next topic, deployment on affordability of heat pumps, where we are trying to help reducing the installation cost for heat pumps, gaining obviously sad urgency over the last weeks. And with a third very focused topic, which might actually be of interest because there is quite an extensive district heating infrastructure in the Ukraine, in the different municipalities. And here, basically, the funding goes to district heating operators, which in your case largely would probably be municipalities, to help them develop investment plans in order to convert into using low-grade energy opportunities, be it renewable based, or be it waste based into an existing infrastructure. The third pillar here, I've mentioned this already. I think I've mentioned quite a bit on skills and capacities for the construction sector and industry. I think I leave it here and move to the next slide. Here, the next three clusters of work, they move very much into the area of supporting the local and regional levels under different perspectives. The first cluster would be devoted to building a national, regional, and local policy framework. And I'd like to highlight the first one. The first one, because it's basically a direct collaboration with city administrations and regional administrations across Europe in order to offer them through the LIFE Energy Transition Program technical support for capacity building for their offices in order to formulate and implement their clean energy transition strategies for 2030, but obviously already looking in the pathway to 2050 in order to have an implementation and on monitoring of highly ambitious energy and climate plans. Then the other topics under this cluster are fairly policy related, but highly focused. You can see this already by the titles, making the energy efficiency the first principle more operational, the effective implementation of key legislation, which in this call 22 is devoted exclusively to the Building Performance Directive. And the last topic, which will create a new product facility, which actually for energy related products will offer really a support facility for suppliers and retailers. So you can already tell these three topics are extremely focused, but there might be of course of interest for you, but I'm just kind of mentioning them in the interest of time. The next two clusters are entirely devoted to mobilizing investment into sustainable energy and actually tackling the challenge from both the demand side and the supply side of money, if you want. On the demand side, to basically help project developers in different ways to actually get local and regional investment programs concretely off the ground, so giving really technical assistance to launching investment programs. So this can be either done through the so-called project development assistance. That is an instrument which is very similar to our sister facility, which is run by the European Investment Bank, the ELINA program. So maybe some of you have heard of that. And here we are really giving the technical assistance for developers to formulate and launch their concrete investment. Whereas the other two topics, integrated home renovation services and the setting up of public facilitation structures, here we are really looking to set up so-called one-stop shops services in the different member states, and they are typically really at the local or at the regional level at most, and really trying to pool together services which allows a much faster pace and service for homeowners or for municipalities in order to have high quality building renovation done with a standardized, systemized services and with a high quality output. The last cluster, attracting private finance, as I said, that's probably the other side of the coin towards the challenge of getting more investment on the ground. Here we are basically trying to launch work in order to make energy efficiency attractive for day-to-day banks. So basically, in very simple terms, how can we make energy efficiency as easy and standardized as getting a loan for a car Now that's obviously a bit simplified, but that's really what is behind this work, where we are actually working with the banking sector very much in order to have standardized products for loans and mortgages for the sustainable energy projects, either in renovation, but also for other type of work in the industrial sector, for SMEs notably. And the first bullet is mainstreaming, where we are working with the banks directly on structural development of products. Whereas, for example, the second bullet, innovative financing schemes, is very pragmatic, is really rolling out new financing schemes across the EU and really piloting new approaches and getting them future-proofed evidence that they work, and hopefully then being basically turned into permanent offers of financing schemes. So this is sufficient and quite dense and in terms of the funding topics which we have available. As I said, I hope I gave you a flavor with a helicopter flight. But of course, on our website, we actually do have specific presentations for each of these topics, which are available, recorded from our European Info Day. And in case any of the topics would match your interest, your line of work, and your ideas, you would be able to really have a fully fledged presentation, which of course would do much more honor to the work actually done. To the next slide, please. Also here, we'll move to some examples. We'll take the next example, Maya, in the interest of time. I'll present you 2 examples, so let me go to the next slide already. Here, I'd like to present to you one of our projects. It's called STEP, which is really working on the citizen-centric work, representing a very excellent example of the work that we are undertaking structurally, but also very pragmatically on the ground on alleviating energy poverty, in this case in 9 countries. And here the approach is really that there is a setup of a national network in all of these 9 countries, which really brings together consumers, but exactly frontline organizations who have access, expertise, but also have access to consumers, and who actually will be training with low-cost energy advice about 15,000 consumers in the 9 countries in order to have tangible cuts on their energy bills. On top of that, and that is very typical for the live energy transition work, on top of the actual tangible cuts of the energy bills of 15,000 consumers, the project really aims to institutionalize the energy advice services in consumer NGOs in order to really have a structural change of how the market approaches such communities, and how the market can actually benefit from getting best practices on such low-cost energy advice in order to have convergence of best practices, proofs that they do actually have an impact, and thus basically offering also a shortcut for next consumer organizations or for the next following municipalities who would like to take up these models, and in order to have passed all of these test phasing and impact evidence already. That is for the project STEP. Let's move to the next project example, where we move to a completely different line of work. Here we actually, I'd like to share with you an example of our work on mobilizing concrete investment on the ground by really piloting innovative processes, but also innovative contractual setups in order to overcome barriers and actually even change law and regulation. Here, the example of Accelerate in Latvia, where we are looking at a deep renovation of public buildings, but also of multifamily buildings. And those of you who work in this segment, you know that these are, the condominiums are actually one of the most challenging segments in the building sector. And here, for the first time in Latvia, the team has probed long-term energy performance contracting, which is a special way of how basically the investment is given upfront by a third party. So not by the families and not by the municipality, but by a third party. And the investment is being paid back for a while by the energy savings which are achieved with the energy measures and the energy renovations. And once that the investment has been paid back, then of course the energy savings go to the immediate owners, either to the municipality or to the residential owners, who will then enjoy the full benefit of their energy savings. So that basically is quickly the concept behind this. So in terms of the real and the concrete investment, so we've helped the municipality to actually engage into a 20 million program of energy investment. So that already in itself is a great achievement for the municipalities engaged, but also, of course, notably for the users of these buildings. On top of this, however, the project actually really proved smarter ways of financing energy efficiency, as opposed to the very dominant approach of using public grants, which in such a case of an obvious payback constellation is actually not needed. The public grants can go to more difficult segments. And here it was really the first energy performance contracts which were used in municipalities in Latvia. And there was even a change of law. The regulation for accepting third-party financing in Latvia was actually changed thanks to this project. Let's quickly move on. Interest of time. I know I'm having the last presentation of already very rich presentations, so I'm trying to be as spicy as I possibly can. Here, this slide I think is very nice still to share with you, because this really shows those projects which are successfully implemented already with participation of partners from the Ukraine. And when you look a little bit at the description or the mini descriptions of these projects, you see that there has been interest in energy performance contracting, in the work of ENPC, Intrans, or the last project which is mentioned here, Refine, which looks at the refinancing scheme for energy efficiency services, but also heating, the district heating has already come up here. There has been a key project, Keep Warm, which has been looking at the mapping of the performance of district heating systems in Central and Eastern Europe, in which there's a whole chapter devoted to the work and the challenges and the potentials being offered in the district heating infrastructure of the Ukraine. There's been work on nearly zero energy buildings. There has been work ongoing on green mortgages with Smarter, and there's currently work ongoing under Excite with a range of cities. Looking at energy management systems, optimizing energy management, control and monitoring in municipality, in municipal consumptions, but also work on energy poverty with the work on COMACT, which looks at multi-family apartment buildings in Central, Eastern and Southeastern Europe in order to have low-cost measures being applied in order to decrease the effects of energy poverty. Moving to the next slide, which I think I can skip because it explains the eligibility of partners, which is as for all of life. Let's rather go to the next slide. Thank you, Maya. Sorry. So basically, in a nutshell, proposals which succeed under the LIFE clean energy transition. You've seen that we have fairly guided call topics. So the key here obviously is to really dive into the detailed guidance of each of the call topics, which is your line of work, and really take the requirements and targets and guidance absolutely to your heart. They are really the guiding principle for succeeding in this call. And then, of course, all of the other tips are fairly straightforward, which I think would have been shared by any of my colleagues also for the other sub-programs. So I think we'll move on. The next slide, we'll take basically the next slide, Maya, the final slide, in order to underline one very point that I have mentioned yet so far. So just a quick point. Maya explained the deadline for many of the calls of our colleagues in the other sub-programs. Here we have a differentiated call deadline. We are actually looking for a call deadline of 16th of November. So this is different. We have about 100 million available for grants this year, which normally produces about 60 to 70 new projects in all of these areas that I described. What is important here is the point on the minimum of 3 eligible entities from 3 different eligible countries. So most of the topics actually you will find this requirement of having a partnership with partners from other countries with a minimum of 3. There are a few exceptions on this. For example, if you've followed the short description of the project in Latvia, so for example, when we engage into technical assistance in order to help project developers to get investment off the ground and to get their investment mobilized, those topics are actually the exception because they would allow very naturally. So it makes a lot of sense to work in a mono country proposal. But most of the work that I presented is actually across different countries. And in reality, there's a minimum of 3 partners, but in reality, the average number of partners is higher depending on the technical focus and depending also on the number of stakeholders and how focused and zoomed in the topic guidance would be. You would find anything between 5 and 15 partners in a project, and probably if we take the mathematical average, it probably would lie about 8 to 10. I'm always a bit cautious here because honestly, it depends very much on the nature of the project. It depends very much on the number of stakeholders which are relevant to engage in order to gain EU valid results. And that number can actually be very different, and it's up to you to choose that best number for you. There is no need to actually have a bigger consortium for the sake of it. Really, it is up to you to be able to make this tailor-made to the interest and the benefit of your project. Also, again, the funding rate of 95% is specific to the LifeSet call, and which reflects simply that there's really detailed guidance and prescriptive funding topics and a series of requirements, and therefore the funding rate in order to help our stakeholders in order to actually find their ideas, but matched with a level of ambition which is required by the call. This is, I think, what I can share on the Life Clean Energy Transition today, as all of our other teams. Obviously, our whole team working on energy transition is very happy to be available for questions, not only today, of course, but also through our functional mailbox, which you see here as the first one. Basically, you would have about 30 colleagues behind this mailbox and being the expert in the different areas and being very happy to be available. But of course, first of all, there's a really very rich guidance in case the presentation triggered your interest and which you might want to digest and dive in first in order to really find your way in which way this program could be of help to you and to your important work and to your important challenges that you must be facing currently. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Aneta. Let me just stop sharing my screen. Right. Okay, so this was the last presentation that we have foreseen for this morning. I don't know if there are any specific questions specific to Aneta's presentation in the chat. I can quickly check because now I can see it. Yes, I see there is a number of questions. So, and it's a mix of the questions on the policy areas and the mechanics of the LIFE program. Mm-hmm. So what I would like to propose in this case, unless you see, Aneta, any pressing question that you would like to answer right away, that we will reconvene in 1 hour to calmly answer all the questions that haven't been answered yet. Unless there is one you urgently would like to tackle, Aneta?
I think I could answer because you're right.
Okay.
Quite a few are really structurally and on the mechanics of the program, and which would apply across horizontally. No, but there is one question which is really relating to one life set, and maybe I could just cover this and like this at least that it's done in the context, if you allow. So there is a question which asks, how would you define vulnerable districts in funding topic number 1, which is a very good question because, as you know, there is no universal definition of energy poverty. And there's also no universal definition of vulnerability of the population being exposed to socioeconomic challenges, because normally it's basically a mix of different criteria in terms of income, in terms of access to services, in terms of density of population, and so on. Now, there is no absolute definition here, but each of the member states, but even cities at their level, because normally that work takes place at the level of a city, and it has a certain appreciation of which population they would consider being exposed to vulnerability and would be able to qualify for this work, because there's basically no absolute definition here. So here, basically, the program recognizes the diversity, unfortunately, of vulnerability in Europe, and recognizes that there is no one standard, and basically works with the data and the evidence that a proposer would submit.
Thank you, Aneta. I actually, if I'm not mistaken, the questions that are remaining are rather few, and they have been, many of them have been answered. And there is, so perhaps we can very quickly also tackle the last few that were not yet answered.
Yeah. Yes, we could try like this. We could liberate our kind audience.
Exactly.
And there's also Zoe who's kindly available to help on call questions. But Maya, I'll let you moderate who could address which one.
Right. No? All right. I think we can. I'll start in this section. All right. So there's general questions. Could co-financing be sourced from another EU-funded program? The answer is no. The LIFE projects cannot be co-financed by other EU programs, and I assume, Aneta, this also applies to CET, right? Could international organizations apply for a call? Yes, the calls are open also to international organizations. The question from Olaf has been answered by Fabio. Can the associations of private enterprises take part in the LIFE programs, or are there some restrictions? No, there are no restrictions. Associations of enterprises can take part, can apply. I think there is a specific question on clean energy transition, Aneta, at 11:51. When we talk about phase out and developing the project, the distribution generation would be in compliance with core citizens in the clean energy transition.
I'm sorry, Maya, I'm afraid, and I'm sorry also to Natalia, because I'm afraid I'm not quite sure that I understand the question.
Natalia, would you like maybe to take the floor to explain?
Yes, sure. Thank you very much for this opportunity to join. Yeah, I would like, first of all, thank you very much for your presentation and very, very detailed information. So I'd like to explain my question. Question was about for example, we have some phase out regions that in the case of coal policy should be closed and should transfer to the other activities. And we look at these regions on the focus of to integrate some projects of distribution generation, distribution network, etc. So I mean, creating some energy islands, so-called. Is this relevant? Is this compliance with first cluster of the above-mentioned projects? My question was about this.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, Natalia, thank you. Thank you very much. That helps me a lot understanding from which perspective your question comes from. I think, I mean, obviously, it's always difficult to respond to a quick description, even as good as it was. Having said this, I have the impression that this could have qualified actually for the work that we had open last year in the Call 21, where we had a specific topic to allow regions of the coal transition to develop plans of how to actually move and shift economic activities, and notably in the sustainable energy sector, and to gain the capacity and resources to access funds, because we are not funding equipment. Our program cannot do this, but we can provide resources and capacity in a project, or structured in a project, for regional actors to come up with an economic remodeling plan, and to take engagement processes to apply for funds under the Just Transition funds, for example, or in other basically funds which are designated for such work. Having said this, unfortunately, this topic is not open this year. It might be open again in the future, but it's not part of the work of 22. Having said this, I would advise you, and I hope that my colleague is agreeing with me, Bernd, to look at the work that can be done under climate, because we're working very closely here on the coal regions, because we actually share this line of work together with our climate colleagues, and whether there would be more opportunities here. Bernd.
Thanks, Annette. I mean, not much to add here. I mean, the transition of coal regions is one out of many options which we have. And the primary aim is not the phasing out of coal in coal regions. I mean, the LIFE program, it is proposing accompanying measures which help to alleviate the situation in those areas. And the primary aim is to reduce CO2 emissions in various industry sectors, I mean, including the energy production sector. But it's, I mean, the phasing out in coal region is only one aspect, and it's well, I don't want to dwell more about this one here now.
Thank you, Bernd. Thank you, Annette. I have answered the questions asked by Lina and Loic in the chat. So I hope you find those answers satisfactory. So basically, if you're not sure which call is the best for you, send us a brief description of your project idea by email, and we will tell you which call is most appropriate. No problem with that. And as for the application forms, not just for SIPs and SNAPs, but for all the projects, they are available in the tenders portal, and you will receive the link to this portal in our presentations, so you can navigate from there. Okay. I don't see any more questions. So if everybody agrees, we will close the meeting now. So we will, in principle, then not reconvene in the afternoon. I hope that's acceptable for everybody. In any case, you know where to find us online. And you have seen our email addresses, and again, we will share them with you in the presentations that will be circulated to all the participants shortly after the meeting. So don't hesitate to reach out to us if you still have some doubts or specific questions. We will do our best to assist you. We are not closing for the summer. We are working and we are covering all the live sub-programs. So even if it takes us a couple of days to respond, you will still get an answer from us. With this, I would like to thank you for joining us today on this very special day, very first live info session in Ukraine. And I would like to also thank my colleagues who shared the floor with me and prepared all the presentations and make this event possible. Also my colleagues from DG Environment, who liaised with representatives of Ukraine and made sure that we can meet here today online. And of course, big thank you to the interpreters. Sorry for exceeding a bit the time, but I think thanks to you, this meeting was accessible to even more people. I keep my fingers crossed for your applications. I hope you will try to submit a couple maybe this year. If not, we are going to work with you and the representatives of Ukraine to provide you with the necessary tools and measures so that you can, in the years to come, also actively participate to the LIFE program. Thank you so much and have a good afternoon.